if you can control inflation and bring it down to under 5%, which is the case of all of these countries, and if you can do that for 15 years or 20 years continuously, and you can grow even a little bit, and actually if you take the 15 years since 1996, Brazil, Mexico, and Chile have grown about the same average. Some years Brazil grows more, some years Chile grows more, some years like this year and last year Mexico grows more. The average is about the same. It's not much, it's about 4% average over these 15 years. But if you have 4% growth every year for 15 years, and you have low inflation, and you have public finances under control, you're going to bring down interest rates, even in Brazil, where it's more difficult in jules. It's going to be much more difficult to do it, but even there, if you can do this, you will begin to have people who have access to credit. And the key to all of these policies has been down. Access to credit to buy houses, to buy cars, to everything else. And if this happens, your middle class will expand. And finally, this has begun to occur. So I think that this is the first most important change that has occurred, and it's the first important division in Latin America. Because there are other countries where this does not happen. Actually, most countries in Latin America, this has still not happened. In Colombia, for example, which is a well-governed, well-administered country, it hasn't happened. Colombia not only remains very unequal, like Brazil, like Mexico, like Chile, but in addition, in Colombia, the middle class still does not represent more than 30% of the population. The same is true of Peru, which has had the highest growth rate of any country in Latin America in the last 10 years, but where, again, the middle class is still only around 30% of the population. It's true of Venezuela, which used to have a very large middle class through the 1970s because of oil. Venezuela is like Azerbaijan, bigger, same place. A lot of oil, but that's all. But it's good. It's better to have a lot of oil than not to have a lot of oil. But the middle class in Venezuela has shrunk enormously. Argentina is always a very complicated situation. It's very difficult to ever always place Argentina anywhere in any classification of Latin America because it doesn't fit anywhere. It's just alone on its own. It's separate. It's different. No one understands why, except the Argentines. They don't really understand. But coming from an old middle class, they still have gone through such a series of crises that they're not really in the same situation as Mexico, Brazil, and Chile are today. The Central American countries, with the exception of Costa Rica, are not at all in that situation. The Caribbean countries are not at all in that situation. And other countries in Latin America, like Ecuador, like Bolivia, like Paraguay, are not in that situation either. So this is the first division, which is important, because I mainly want to emphasize the incredible change that has finally occurred after 200 years. It's been a long time that this should have happened. It hadn't happened, and finally it has. I'll conclude with just a couple of reflections on another division which is very important and which often we're not seeing, or people from outside of Latin America are not seeing, because there's a tendency, which is logical, to group all of Latin America together. In fact, we have increasingly two very different regions in the region, which are growing increasingly apart. And they're growing apart for one simple reason. They have a totally different form of insertion in the global economy. On the one hand, you have South America, which, even though Brazil is somewhat different because its foreign trade is a smaller percentage of its GDP than in the other countries, most of South America's main insertion in the global economy is through the export of commodities today. What does Argentina do in the world economy? It exports soybeans. Period. Full stop. That's what it does. What does Chile do? It exports copper. What does Peru do? It exports copper. What does Venezuela do? It exports oil. And what do the other countries do? Bolivia, Paraguay also export soybeans and gas. These are all countries whose insertion in the global economy is fundamentally on commodity exports. Now, this is a good thing because prices are very high. Their foreign trade is very diversified. They export to China, they export to India, they export to Europe, they export a little bit to the United States, of course, a little bit to everybody. They receive foreign investment from the Chinese, from the Europeans, from everybody, mainly in natural resource or commodity generation. And they do this very effectively. This is their insertion. Until very recently, it looked like this was a very good idea because China was booming, India was booming, commodity prices were high, you had a bonanza of foreign revenues which you could invest in all sorts of different things. Today, this is beginning to look less of a great idea because the Chinese economy is cooling down, the Indian economy is cooling down, obviously the Western European economy is cooling down, and actually the economy that is doing best in the world right now is the American economy. But in any case, this is South America. And then you have Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean, whose insertion in the global economy, in the first place, is not an insertion in the global economy. It's an insertion in the North American economy. Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean's trade, investment, etc., is all with the United States and Canada. Not with China, not with Europe, not with India. Second, these are not countries that produce commodities. They are exclusively countries that produce manufactured exports or other forms of insertion, but they are mainly countries for which other aspects of relationships with the rest of the world are more important. Tourism, remittances for migrants, which are also important in Ecuador, but only in Ecuador. The only country in South America where remittances from immigrants are important is Ecuador. It's still important. For Mexico, for El Salvador, for Guatemala, for the Dominican Republic, for Cuba, remittances are fundamental. Tourism is fundamental. Manufactured exports are increasingly important for a country like Mexico, automobiles. So you have two totally different regions. Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean today seem to be doing a little bit better than South America because the American economy is doing better than the rest of the world's economy, and we are linked to the United States. For better or for worse, this is a different issue. If there is a new recession in the United States, it will be a disaster for Mexico, and for Central America, and for the Caribbean. I'll end on this note. Even on something as strange and special as drug trafficking, Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean belong to the United States and Canadian economic area. Who do we export our drugs to? To the United States, which is where we should. It's closer, they like the drugs more, they're competitive, you have good market share, you have a brand, and the Colombians also do, but not as much. We're taking some market share away from it. We will get more market share as time goes on. So anyway, these are a few thoughts to share with you, and I think we will have a very good discussion. Thank you very much.
I'm very happy, first, to be part of this event on social transformation in Latin America. And it is very fortunate that this week and this event is being held here in Georgia, where in the last few years we've seen major social changes. I had these meetings yesterday with the Prime Minister and the Vice Prime Minister and was impressed by the way corruption and organized crime were uprooted in Georgia. The political will of the government to make these changes and accountability of the government to the people are just amazing and are an important example that we all should learn from. In fact, we have a meeting also with Progress, and then we heard more about what they have done in Georgia. I think that social transformation is a continuous process. It never finishes. In Latin America, we have democracy almost everywhere since more than 20 years. However, democracy alone doesn't solve all the problems of a society. Democracy is not perfect. More important than democracy is justice, social justice. Democracy is just a tool to achieve social justice. It is a delicate tool and can be hijacked by special interests, large economic groups, local and international media conglomerates, and even foreign intervention. For democracy to work, social justice is very important. Social justice is the foundation for any government system. The path towards social justice is always a long and painful path. Pain, suffering, emergencies, wars, natural disasters, and crises invariably have to happen before social change and justice can be achieved. In Latin America, as here in Georgia, we've had our fair share of crises. We've had coups d'etats, dictatorships, wars, extreme poverty, and hunger. These upheavals were very common in the past, but are still happening today. In the last few years, we've had coups d'etats and attempted coups d'etats in Honduras, Venezuela, and even in my country, Ecuador. We had many wars also, and still have several drug-related conflicts, which are claiming thousands of lives in Colombia and Mexico. These upheavals and conflicts occur in more mature democracies as well. We see this as a result of the global economic crisis taking place in Europe and the United States. There is the Occupy movement, which is getting stronger and demanding more justice from politicians, governments, and the market. It is in time of crises that social injustice becomes apparent and people rise and demand their rights. But as a whole, I believe that Latin America has entered into a mature stage towards achieving democracy and social justice. We now have strong institutions that monitor human rights, that oversee freedom of expression and freedom of the press, that keep an eye on the activities of large corporations and multinational firms, and that regulate the financial and banking systems. Strong public institutions with clear and transparent rules are very important for democracy to work. Governability is part of that. To achieve social justice, it's also important to have social nets to help the most in need. It is said that a measure of the moral values of a society can be made by seeing how it treats the weakest and the most vulnerable members. In Ecuador, we have made important progress to support the weakest members of our society. In the last 5 years, more money has been spent on education and healthcare than in the previous 30 years. The extremely poor, especially children, should be taken care of and given the opportunities to learn, to grow healthy, to have hopes, and to have dreams. We also have programs for the elderly and the handicapped. Our vice president, who himself is paralyzed and lives in a wheelchair, heads the program for supporting the handicapped and has recently been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for his amazing and inspiring work. Helping the weak, the poor, the most vulnerable, should not be viewed merely as charity work. By empowering them and including them in society, by teaching them and giving them opportunities to be productive, helps the economy, reduces crime rates, and creates a better and stronger society. But we in Ecuador have taken social justice a step further. Our 2008 constitutional reform is unique in the world. It is the only constitution that, aside from guaranteeing human rights, recognizes the rights of nature, the rights of the earth, or the Pachamama, as we call it. This concept is based on the realization that humans are not the owners of the planet. We live on it, we depend on it, we use it and abuse it, and we need it to survive. But it has to be protected. Just like a helpless child has rights and has to be protected, so too nature, being so fragile, has rights and has to be protected. This concept puts great responsibility on us humans to protect the earth,